The Last Stop Motel stood at the edge of a desolate highway, nestled between miles of barren desert and a sky perpetually painted in hues of twilight. Its neon sign flickered erratically, casting a sickly green glow over the cracked asphalt. To most passers-by, it seemed like any other rundown motel, a relic from a bygone era. But the locals whispered of its dark reputation, a place where people went to die. On a stormy night, David and Linda Harper, a weary couple on the brink of divorce, found themselves driving down the deserted road. The rain hammered against their car, and visibility was almost nil. When they saw the faint glow of the Last Stop Motel sign, it seemed like a beacon of salvation. David pulled the car into the motel's parking lot, the tires crunching on gravel. "We can stay here for the night," he suggested, though there was a palpable reluctance in his voice. Linda, too tired to argue, nodded silently. The lobby was dimly lit, with faded wallpaper and a musty smell that hung in the air. An elderly man sat behind the reception desk, his expression unreadable. His eyes, however, held an unsettling gleam. "Welcome to the Last Stop Motel," he said in a gravelly voice. "Checking in for the night?" David hesitated but then nodded. "Yes, just for one night." The old man handed them a key. "Room 13, he said, his voice tinged with something that sounded almost like amusement. "Enjoy your stay." As they walked down the narrow corridor to their room, Linda felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The motel's atmosphere was oppressive, the air thick with an unspoken dread. When they reached room 13, David unlocked the door, and they stepped inside. The room was as shabby as the rest of the motel, worn-out carpet, peeling wallpaper, and a bed that creaked ominously. A single window looked out onto the parking lot, where the rain continued to pour. The couple set their bags down and exchanged a weary glance. Neither spoke of the fight they had been having before they found the motel. The silence between them was heavy with unresolved tension. As they settled in for the night, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She glanced at David, who had already fallen asleep, and then back at the room. It felt as if the walls were closing in, the air growing thicker by the minute. Unable to sleep, Linda decided to take a walk to clear her head. She slipped on her jacket and quietly left the room, leaving David to his rest. The corridor was eerily silent, the only sound the soft patter of rain against the roof. As Linda wandered the motel, she noticed something strange. The doors to the other rooms were all slightly ajar, and from within, she could hear faint whispers and sobs. Curiosity and unease gnawed at her, and she cautiously peered into one of the rooms. Inside, she saw a woman sitting on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. Her face was gaunt, and her eyes hollow, as if life had been drained from her. Linda quickly moved on, but the scene repeated itself in room after room. Each occupant seemed lost in their own despair, their presence more ghostly than human. Panic began to rise in Linda's chest. She hurried back to room 13, her heart pounding. As she reached the door, she heard a low, guttural whisper. She turned to see the old man from the reception standing at the end of the corridor, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You shouldn't be wandering around," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "This place has a way of keeping people." Linda felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. The old man smiled, a slow, eerie grin. "The Last Stop Motel," he began, "isn't just a place for weary travelers. It's a place for those who have given up, those who have no will to go on. It draws them in, like moths to a flame, offering a final resting place." Linda shook her head, refusing to believe what she was hearing. "You're crazy," she whispered. The old man shrugged. "Believe what you will," he said. "But you and your husband are here for a reason. Perhaps you should ask yourself why." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Linda standing in the corridor, her mind racing. She hurried back into the room and shook David awake. "David, we need to leave," she said urgently. "Something's not right here." David groggily rubbed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" he muttered. "The people here, they're not normal," Linda insisted. "We have to go." David looked at her, his face a mix of confusion and irritation. Linda, it's late, and it's pouring outside. Just get some sleep. We'll leave in the morning. But Linda couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. She paced the room, her mind racing. Then she remembered something, the room number. Room 13. The number was considered unlucky, and she couldn't help but wonder if it was a coincidence. Desperate for answers, Linda began searching the room. She checked the drawers, the closet, even under the bed, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Just as she was about to give up, she noticed a small crack in the wall behind a painting. Curious, she pulled the painting aside and found a hidden compartment. Inside the compartment was a dusty old book. Linda carefully pulled it out and opened it. The pages were filled with handwritten notes detailing the history of the motel. As she read, her eyes widened in horror. The book spoke of the motel's origins, built by a man who had lost his family in a tragic accident. Consumed by grief, he had turned the motel into a place where people could end their suffering. Over the years, countless souls had checked in, never to check out. The motel seemed to feed on their despair, trapping them in a never-ending cycle of sorrow. Linda's hands shook as she closed the book. The truth was clear. The Last Stop Motel was a place of death, and they had unwittingly become its latest victims. Determined to leave, Linda shook David awake once more. This time, he could see the fear in her eyes and reluctantly agreed to go. They quickly gathered their things and headed for the door. But as they reached the corridor, they found themselves surrounded by the motel's other occupants. The once ghostly figures now stood before them, their eyes filled with an eerie light. They reached out, their hands grasping, as if trying to pull the couple into their own despair. Panicking, David and Linda pushed through the crowd, racing towards the exit. The old man stood at the reception desk, watching them with that same unsettling smile. "You can't leave," he said calmly. "This is your final stop." But Linda refused to listen. She and David burst through the front door and ran to their car, the rain pouring down around them. As they fumbled with the keys, Linda glanced back at the motel. The figures were gone, the old man nowhere to be seen. They sped away, the motel's neon sign growing smaller in the rearview mirror. Only when they were miles away did they finally stop, both of them breathing heavily. David looked at Linda, his face pale. "What the hell was that place?" he asked, his voice shaking. Linda shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," she whispered. "But we're never going back." As they drove away, the Last Stop Motel faded into the distance, its dark secrets left behind. But the memory of that night would haunt them forever, a chilling reminder of the place where people went to die, and nearly claimed them as its own.